the main action is obviously going to be on the sanctions. Mike raised an interesting point in passing. Why wait till the morning on the sanctions? Obviously, this is not a complete surprise. It's been warned about by Joe Biden himself and by his administration himself for weeks, often mocked by their impending predictions of what would happen. Of course, at this point, sadly, it came to pass. But I do think that there would be a real statement with an immediate response. I suspect that there's still some need to coordinate with the rest of the allies. Obviously, David, you can prepare in advance, you can scenario plan, but reality is more complicated. Reality presents a very specific scenario, albeit this scenario is quite at the extreme of the spectrum if you look at what's going on. But maybe they feel they need more time to coordinate. But I do think the fact that hours are going to pass until the sanctions are imposed, I think sends, in a sense, probably the wrong message from the American perspective. Of course, obviously in Israel this morning, this is going to be taken in with a big gulp. As we all know, there are two essentially Israeli interests, if you will, in the situation. One is to try to stay on good terms with both the United States and Ukraine in that bloc, and also with Russia. The United States for obvious reasons, because of the alliance. Russia because of the Russian presence in Syria primarily. As we all know, Israel has studiously tried to do whatever it can to say nothing. The foreign ministry decided yesterday it had to say something. It was a statement that last night in our broadcast I compared to a page of the Talmud where you have the text and you need the commentary all around it to try to make sense of it, because it was that carefully worded. I suspect Israel's again going to try to lay low to as much as it can for as long as it can, even on this very active day. And the second interest, David, which frankly in the immediate term is going to be more important, and that is the fate of the 8,000 Israelis in the country, according to the foreign ministry, and the 150,000 to 200,000 Jews in the country, at least as of the estimate as of last week. Israel here, David, important to say, is differently situated. There was a report in the British media that Britain, a country I believe 7 or 8 times the size in terms of population with Israel, has 5,000 citizens in the country, some of whom may have left since then. Israel, a country much smaller in terms of population, had at the eve of this crisis 10 to 15,000 nationals in the country, 3 times the number of British citizens, even though we're a much smaller country. Add to that, of course, the much larger Jewish community in Ukraine, for which Israel feels a sense of responsibility. And that's why in Israel, more than in other countries, the issue of the presence of nationals, and in our case Jews on the territory, is more central to the way we look at the situation. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of attention paid to that. And also, not coincidentally, in addition to being a legitimate issue in its own right, a very legitimate issue in its own right, it is also a talking point for Israeli policymakers to distract from the first situation.